Previously in episode 5.
Then the marches of people with disabilities got targeted, creating concentration camps for protesters. And at this point, we are just laughing. The only solution they know is terror and violence.
Belarus is facing the biggest crisis since its foundation. It's engulfed in widespread protests against the government and the dictator Lukashenko, who they claim rigged the elections last year. In the last episode, we went into detail with Sasha, who is an activist from Belarus, about what's going on there and how it has turned into modern-day dictatorship. So make sure you listen to that episode. So continuing the story, in today's episode, Sasha talks about her disability and how the United States stepped in when her own country, Belarus, had completely given up on her when she was caught in a house fire at the age of 11 months. She underwent reconstructive surgeries for 7 years in the United States, going back and forth from Belarus. Now, after almost 2 decades, she's in Belarus fighting against the very same government that turned its back on her, especially when she had planned to move abroad. She explains why. I am your host Mithil and you are listening to the Curiously Candid Show. If you're comfortable with talking about your disability, what has happened to you, and how are you, in particularly in the context of you protesting in Belarus? I just want to know like how that has been a factor you going out on the streets and actively protesting.
I was in a house fire when I was 11 months old. It was a pretty big house fire in the house where my family lived at the time. It was a really old, decrepit house that was sort of falling apart because my family was poor. The fire was so intense that the roof of the house burnt down and collapsed. And fortunately, I was the only one who was caught in it. My dad was at work, my 2 older siblings were at school, and my mom was hanging laundry in the yard. And I was sleeping in a baby crib inside. So when the roof collapsed, one of the beams fell on the crib. And somehow it fell in a way where the burning part landed on my head. So the area of burns was not actually that big, but the burns themselves were really, really deep and intense. Like we have I don't know if this is only in the Russian and Soviet countries or if this is a universal scale, but there are 4 levels of severity of burns, 1 being the lightest and 4 being the most severe. And the vast majority of my burns were level 4. So I unfortunately lost my fingers, and a big part of my face and my head was damaged. But fortunately, I was able to save my eyes because I covered them with my hands. And after that, I received a total of 39 surgeries. From the first 8 were done when I was still a baby, where the doctors were trying to, save my life. And then the rest of them were done later at different ages, more of reconstructive surgery, where until I think I was 6 or 7, I didn't have a nose. A lot of stuff was done all over my face, like around my mouth, around my eyes. And also some operations were done on my hands because when I was little, they were a bit different and their movement was a lot more limited. So I think there was around 3 surgeries on each hand to make them more functional. I was very, very fortunate in that my eyesight wasn't damaged. At least to my knowledge, my cognitive and learning abilities were not impaired in any way, even though when I was a baby, the doctors told my parents that the brain might have been damaged during the fire or during the recovery process. But very fortunately for me, apart from the physical limitations of not having fingers, I grew up in many ways just like an ordinary child. I did not go to kindergarten, but I went to an average public school. I received an average education just like any kid, and then I went to college when I graduated. The biggest factor in my past was that when I was, I think, 5 or 6, my family received an invitation from the United States to receive plastic surgeries in one of the Shriners hospitals in a city called Portland, Oregon. So we went a total of 10 times over the course of 15 years. And I believe around 24, 25, or 26 surgeries were done in the States.
I mean, you had to go back and forth from Belarus to the US many
Yeah.
times. And how long was the stay usually for? 6 months?
It was very different. The first time we went, it was more than a year. It was around a year and 3 months.
I see.
And after that, the longest trips took around 5 to 7 months, and the shortest took around like a month and a half to 2 months. It was different each time, depending on what the doctors planned for me.
And how did you manage school at that time?
In some years, we tried to time the visits to summer vacations. So I would like go off school and we would fly to America. In some years, I would just skip a few months of school and that was it.
With the first surgery, you were there for a year. And how did that pan out?
That was actually the first year we went was the most difficult time we ever had in America, because we were both, my mother and I, we were both very new to the idea of going to another country for such a long time. And actually, it was quite difficult for us because the initial plan had been that we were expected to go to America only once, but for 7 years, and just stay there for that time and then come back. But later the plans were rearranged because it didn't really work out for us financially. But the first year was very difficult because, all of the cultural shock of coming to a new country, plus we didn't know the language like at all. And I only started learning it while I was there. And also the way we came to America was for the first, I don't know, like maybe 5 or 6 visits. What happened was just nice people, usually from a Baptist church community, would allow us to live in their home, like if they had a spare bedroom or something like that. So we would live a few months here or a few months there. Some people would take us in for the entirety of our visit. Some people would only be able to take us in for a month or two. And the very first family that took us in were not very nice people, to be honest. I don't want to say who they were, but they were sort of conned into taking us. The woman that arranged our very first visit, she was not entirely honest with them. She told them that we were going to come for a few months and then leave. And only after we came over did they find out that we were expected to stay there for 7 years. So they did not treat us very kindly, and in the end, they just kicked us out of their house. And we had to rely on the kindness of complete strangers in a different country for, living situations, for food, for transportation, for everything. It was quite scary. And for me personally, the saddest part, honestly, is that I remember very little of it. I don't know if this is a consequence of the fire or a coping mechanism or some sort of mental process in my brain, but I actually remember very little of my past. So I feel like my mom had to deal with most of it with a small child on her hands who was receiving surgeries at the time. Like, I don't remember how many I had in the first year. Yeah, but some of the surgeries were quite intense, I have to say. Like, I remember at some point my eyelids were sewn shut for several days. And it's just my medical history is like a separate horror story. So I don't want to get too deep into it, but let's just say we've been through some difficult times, and tying all of this back to the present situation, I never really saw much good from my home country, from Belarus, both in terms of how the government treated me as a disabled person and my family as a family with a disabled child. Like, one of the strongest memories we have was when we received the initial invitation to go to the States. The treatment itself, all of the surgeries were free, but we had to pay.
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
So the church was paying for them.
I'm not sure. There was like a whole Bill Clinton's personal secretary got involved and sent a letter to the person, the foundation who was helping us, like to get involved, and we have a copy of that letter. And there was like a lot of press involved, and people were raising money for us. It was pretty intense, and I barely remember any of it. But the fact was that in America, all of these people were like gathering to help us and to, somehow support us and do something for us in any way they could. Like, we had people who were, I realize now by, like by normal standards, they were pretty like poor people, but they had like read an article about me in a local newspaper or saw me on TV, and they called the newspaper or news station, got our address, and came over and brought me like a bunch of Barbies and some presents and stuff like that. And on the flip side of that, back in Belarus, when my mom came to the Ministry of Healthcare, the Department of Healthcare, like the main organization that deals with healthcare in Belarus, and asked them for some help or support, telling them basically, I have a disabled child and we were invited for treatment. Can you help us? We just need money for like plane tickets. The official that offered her to give me up, just in simple terms, this person, I don't remember that, but this person told her, you have two older, healthy children. You are in your early 30s. You could have more kids if you wanted to. Why do you want all of these problems? We never really received any.
And this is how many years ago?
Oh, it was a long time ago. It was for the first trip to the States. So I must have been like 6. So that was over 25 years ago. But I just trust me when I tell you that things have not improved much since then. In terms of helping.
I was going to ask you that. I was like, is it better?
No.
Is it the same?
No. Yeah. In terms of, for people with disabilities, it hasn't gotten any better. since then. Unlike the country level, it didn't get much better at all. And one thing that really speaks to me in a big way was that I honestly, some of my friends sort of clown me for this because I never really received much, support or any sort of assistance from our government or our state in terms of, support as a disabled person. And also on another level, I also was really unhappy about the way our society always treated disabled people, where sort of because we barely have any, conditions to, participate in life as normal members of the society. A lot of times people with disabilities are completely isolated, just from society in total, like at all. I personally know people who have things like cerebral palsy, or they are wheelchair users for some other reasons, and they have not left their apartments in years because there are just no conditions for that. Nobody else seems to be interested in creating, an accessible environment.
So you can say that perhaps this is also one of your motivations to protest, I guess, right?
Absolutely, because so the reason why I said why my friends laugh at me was that I actually, for the longest time, my dream was to leave, to relocate, go to a different country and find a job and try living somewhere else. And I sort of took a long time planning it or deciding if I actually wanted to try and do it. And I 2020 was supposed to be my year when I break out and finally leave. And then the pandemic happened. And then I remember distinctly around like a month or a month and a half before the election, I was talking to a friend. Actually, I was talking to my therapist. And we had been talking about politics a bit until then. And I told him how we were discussing how we were going to go vote and vote for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and then probably go out a couple of times and protest after that, because everybody was expecting that the election was going to be rigged and it's going to be really bad and people are going to go and at least try protesting. But we thought that it was going to take like a couple of days or maybe weeks, not more than that. And we were fully preparing to sort of, quote unquote, do our civic duty by voting and then by protesting. And then around like, I don't know, October, November, we were thinking we would be just leaving, fleeing the country or whatever. And I did not expect what scale the events that followed were going to take place, just how big, how massive it was going to be. Never in my mind did I think that over 500,000 Belarusians were capable of taking to the streets and gathering in one area of the city. So several months later, several months into the protests, me and my friends were joking, looking back to like a couple months prior and how we were not planning any of it. And I was laughing at myself, saying that if somebody told me 6 months ago that I would be just like building my entire life around, protesting and marching and going to the streets every week, I would have laughed. I would have not believed them. but I don't know why. I'm not a politician. I'm not an anthropologist. I don't know how these things work. I don't know why last year was the year.
You support the opposition. Um, I think her name. She's a female, right? I mean, I can't pronounce the name. But like, so you support her just because she opposes Lukashenko, or
You
is
mean
the reason beyond
Svetlana
that?
Tikhanovskaya?
Yeah.
I thought so. You should have, yeah,
How
just
do you
told
say
me.
her name? Svetlana.
Svetlana. Svit
Svetlana. Okay.
Svetlana. Yeah,
Svetlana.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. You should have just said, as we say, the real president of the Republic of Belarus, because that's who she
Oh
is.
wow. Uh huh.
Uh, yeah, absolutely. I admire her with my whole heart, I have to say. I realize, and I think most of us realize, that the place she is coming from and why she did what she did and what idea she embodies, which is, many people who still, support the regime and who still are on Lukashenko's side. They try to debate with us, saying stuff like, "Oh, you think she would be a good president? She's a nobody. She's just a housewife. She's not a politician." And we are aware that her being the president before all this went down was never the end goal. She, uh, from the very start, she positioned herself as almost a tool, a means to overturn this, crazy mechanism of the dictatorship that had been in place for 26 years, which sounds nuts. And she never claimed any sort of big plan of, running for president again or becoming the president for an entire term. Her program was always 6 months of presidency, during which she was planning to release all of the political prisoners and prepare a new election, which would be
I see.
completely
Mm-hmm.
transparent and fair and follow, all of the proper democratic procedures. So the whole point of her, supposedly quote unquote being a bad president is just completely lost in that
Oh okay.
rhetoric. And then on top of that, if you just look at the transformation that she went through in just several months, where right now she is highly respected on, the international political arena, and she is just putting insane efforts into making sure that, the topic of Belarus stays relevant, where, every couple of days something crazy happens and something new pops up on the news and everybody's attention shifts, here and there and everywhere. And it's extremely important for us, what she's doing, to make sure that, the eyes of the people are still on us and people remember about what's going on and are still, you know, trying to do something to help us, because, as I've said, nothing is over. The situation in Belarus is really far from over, and we still need all the help that we can get. And I am insanely grateful to what she's doing in her position and what she's able to do, especially since, she's in a very vulnerable position herself, where her husband is one of the political prisoners, basically in the hands of the regime. I honestly feel honored and privileged to be fighting alongside the people that are also protesting, the people that I get to meet and interact with through these events. And it's really, it's sad and heartbreaking that my country ended up in a state where such actions were necessary. But at least I'm glad that the people were finally able to, rise up and take a stance for what's right.
I remember you posted a story on Instagram. You were like about Santa Claus. Somebody dressed up in Santa Claus being arrested.
Yeah.
What was that about?
It's honestly one thing, because again, humor is a good coping mechanism, and also, you know, people like to laugh, and I feel like I really got, just to preface it, I really got into TikTok last year, first during the pandemic because I found it entertaining, and then I just sort of tailored my feed in a way where I really actually enjoy the content a lot. And I saw last year, during the BLM protest in the USA, I tried to follow them as closely as I could because I have a lot of friends in the States, and also I just, you know, I care. I saw how TikTok was being used to spread information, both as, you know, to spread awareness about what's happening from, you know, like the street level, like what's actually there, you know, witness accounts. But also people were sharing information about things like, you know, useful tips on, I don't know, how to protest, how to you know, stay safe, what things to pack in your first aid kit, just things like that. And from, you know, having seen all that, I thought that maybe in our situation, we could also use TikTok in that way to hope and, you know, spread awareness about our situation. So I thought, I think this idea came to me in December, where I thought that it would be a way to spread information in a sort of lighthearted way, but also, you know, deliver the information to people about what's happening in Belarus. And I called this series Things That Could Get You Arrested in Belarus. And all of these, I have, I think, like 20 or 20 something episodes planned in total. I've only posted like 2, so I need to get to it more. But all of these stories are based on real facts. Like I have a screenshot or a link for each one. It's none of it is made up. Some examples include people getting arrested for carrying a white-red scarf in their hands. There is actually a video clip, like video evidence of that. 2 people were carrying a scarf between them, and it was a white-red striped scarf. It did not look like this. It did not look like a flag or like some, you know, forbidden symbol. It was a scarf. Right. And a police van drove up, stopped, and like huge armed men in balaclavas ran out, grabbed these 2 people with their scarf and dragged them into the car and drove away. A scarf. A woman received, I don't remember if it was a jail sentence or a fine for taking a photo of her eating like a sweet treat that looks like the protest flag. It's like a marshmallow.
What?
It's like a marshmallow snack, and it has jam in it. So it's literally white, red, white. And she took a picture with it, and she went to court and was prosecuted for taking a photo with a snack. I am not kidding. And I literally have dozens of these stories. And
so I assume the Santa Claus was the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the protesters have already taken inspiration from such stories. Some people drew like beautiful artworks with you know, like sad families having to tell their children that they will not be receiving any gifts because Santa Claus was arrested this year. And also some people took Santa Claus costumes and like hung them up somewhere, like on a tree in a park or somewhere, and pinned posters to them saying like how the police are stealing Christmas because they have to arrest literally Santa Claus. And there are just plenty of stories like these. And so, some of them are just, you can't help but laugh.
But aren't you afraid, like, they may charge you for something. They may charge you for political activity or political motivated. I don't know, whatever is the term there in Belarus. Like,
Oh,
don't be afraid
absolutely.
of that.
I absolutely. That's kind of my main concern, honestly. And going back to your question about me planning to leave the country, I really don't want to. I really don't. That's one thing.
But you will if you have to, I think.
Yes, that's one thing that I share with a lot of people. I know other people who think this way, where we do still have plans or ideas about going to live somewhere else. It's just something that's been a dream of mine since I was a teenager, just going to another country to live there. Like, maybe even for a few months or years, just, to mark it off the bucket list. Like, in particular, I dream about living in London for a few years, and I would also love to live in Japan if I were able to. But that's just, like dreams.
So now what's in for you? Are you gonna stay here till and then protest as long as it takes, or are you thinking of moving out maybe later half of 2021?
It's really difficult to predict, because one thing that happens when the protests stop being so, large scale and intense, like right now, the protest activity became more local and people are gathering every day, but in much smaller groups, and it's less sort of big and loud. And so there are less arrests, less, crackdowns and clashes in the streets. So as a result of that, the armed forces have a lot more free time on their hands. And what they do is they do like pinpoint targeting of different people. And they target journalists, they target publishing houses, they target newspapers that, dare to publish, real facts about the ongoing events. And they also target activists who, take a public stance and speak up and are open about their position. And for better or for worse, I'm one of those people. I realize that outside of Belarus, many people are completely unaware of what's going on, or people are unaware of the scale of these events. And sometimes people leave me comments or messages saying that, oh, we heard that something happened, back in August and September, but we had no idea that all of this was still in full swing and still nothing has changed. And you're still, fighting and being terrorized by this evil dictator. Again, being in this position where I can share these stories in English, where I know most publications or materials, they hit this barrier of needing to be translated and then published somewhere. I feel like, I sort of feel an obligation to try and do what I can to spread awareness and share this information. It is sort of a matter of principle for me that my social media presence is, open and public, where people can see it and have access to this information, because it's really, really important. And I feel like the global community is going to have a big say in how this situation is resolved. We really, honestly, it's almost ignorant to say, but we almost don't care, as long as something is being done, because anything is better than nothing. Any help counts. Any publication or any support.
You have been listening to the Curiously Candid Show. This show is brought to you by the support of the University of Hong Kong. I'm your host Mithil, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel where we post clips, behind the scenes and more. Make sure you also subscribe to us on whichever platforms you get your podcast from, and I'll see you all in the next one.